Welcome back, everyone. In our last lesson, we learned how to work with the functions. And this lesson, we are going to learn about a special type of function, which is the init function. As the name suggests, init comes from initialization. So this basically function to initialize our construct. So this function is going to just run once, and that's when we deploy our construct. So let's start our function. First, again, this is a special type of function. So we are going to use the init function name. For every init function, the name is going to be init. And we are going to just say fun in the beginning. We are not going to say entry. And it is going to take only one parameter. And this parameter is transaction context. And we are going to pass our mutable transaction context here. Let's say tx context. So in this function, what we are going to do is a little bit special. To implement this, first talk a little about authentication in our functions. So what we are going to build is we are going to create a structure, but this structure will only have an ID. So in the beginning of our contract deployment, we are going to transfer this structure to the person who is sending this transaction, which means that the person who is actually deploying our contract. And they will own this special kind of structure. In the beginning of the functions, we can check if the sender has this structure, has this object, to be more precise. If the sender has this object, then they can execute this code. If the sender do not have this object, then we cannot pursue our transaction. So to implement this, I'm going to create another structure. Let's create this here on top. I'm going to call this admin, and it's going to have a key, and we are going to have ID, which is UID. Now we have our structure again. We only have the ID field. And in our init function, what we are going to do is we are going to say transfer, and we are going to call the transfer. And we are going to say, I want to transfer this admin object to the sender of this transaction. So what we are going to send is an admin object. For that, I'm going to create this admin. And for its ID, we are going to use object new transaction context. And that's the object that we are going to send. We can also create this outside of this transfer, but since it's just a little object, I created it in here. And the address that we are going to send is, again, from the transaction context, we are going to get the sender, and we are going to pass the transaction context. We also need to close this one, and we need to delete this one. Now we have our init function, and again, in our init function, we just have one parameter, and that's the transaction context. And then we are creating this admin object, and we are transferring this object to the sender. And as you can see, there is no other way to create this object and send this. That can be done just once, and that's when we create our contract. So we have this init, and we are transferring this admin, and let's see what we can do with it. So I'm going to modify my create messenger function, and here I'm going to also add from, like we have two. And this will also be an address. Instead of from, I'm going to just put the same from here. So what we change is that we are going to actually need to say, okay, I'm sending this from that person to this person. Why would we want to do this? Because first, the ideology was that we are going to create a messenger, and then we are going to get the messenger and send our message. But that's basically sending our message. What I want is, I want the admin of this contract to create the message with saying that this message is from this person to that person, or from this address to that address, and this is the message. I want only the owner of this contract to create these messages. So there are a couple ways to do it, but since we started with our admin struct, let's see how we can do with this structure. So in the beginning of my parameters, I'm going to say underscore, and as the type here, I will say, let's give our admin here. I'm passing the reference of the admin, and as you can see, we have an underscore here. So this means that this is going to be consumed once we pass it. As you can see, we have it here, but after that, we are not going to work with that. So here we are checking if the sender of this transaction has this admin object or not. But in the function, we will not use this admin. It's basically just a checker. What we are going to do is, again, we are going to transfer this messenger not to the sender of this contract, but to the person that who is going to get this message, or the address which is going to get this message. So instead of this transaction context sender CTX, this is basically an address. So I'm going to replace it with 2. So the person who is going to have this message will also have this messenger object that can only be created by the owner of this contract. How we know only the owner? That's because the sender of this function needs to have this admin object, this object we created up here. To have this admin object, they need to run this init function because that's the only way that they can have it. And we cannot run this function. This function can be run only once when we deploy our contract. So the only way a person or a contract to have this admin object is to actually deploy our contract, which makes them the owner of this contract. Again, we transferred our structure here so that they can use in our create messenger function. Thanks for listening to me on this video. And in the next video, we are going to write a test for our contract. I will see you then.